Luke chapter 12, verses 13 to 21. Someone in the crowd said to Jesus, "Teacher, tell my brother to give me my share of our inheritance." Jesus replied, "Friend, who has set me up as your judge or arbiter?" Then he told the crowd, "Avoid greed in all its forms. Your life isn't more secure by what you own, even when you have more than you need." Jesus then told them a parable in these words. There was a rich farmer who had a good harvest. "What will I do?" the farmer mused. "I have no place to store my harvest." "I know. I'll pull down my grain bins and build larger ones. All my grain and goods will go there. Then I'll say to myself, 'You have blessings in reserve for many years to come. Relax, eat, drink, and be merry.' But God said to the farmer, 'You fool, this very night your life will be required of you. To whom will all your accumulated wealth go?' This is the way it works with people who accumulate riches for themselves, but are not rich in God." La palabra de Dios. Gracias a Dios.
Okay, my beloved friends, I don't know all of you. However, I do know many of you, and it's been nearly 3 years since I've been up here in this capacity as a preacher, for many good reasons. And a few things have happened in the past 3 years since I've been up here. A few minor events. Pastor Melissa, my spouse, departed. There's been this pandemic thing, this quarantine, Me Too, Black Lives Matter protests, climate change, Fed fires, smoke quarantine. Do you remember smoke quarantine? Heat bubble, a tumultuous presidential election and insurrection. And through all of this, a growing global awareness of the apocalypse. Yes, the apocalypse. I see a lot of raised eyebrows. It's become real. And not just warnings from academics or pastors or elected officials. And let me clarify, when I say apocalypse, the Greek meaning means one of the interpretations is the unveiling. Okay, the unveiling of reality. Okay. This is an impossibly hard truth that all of our government, church, and economic institutions and their social agreements have fissures, and I mean massive fissures, where we can see the gradual and sometimes sudden undermining of the buttresses under the hallowed institutions. We counted on them to create shared safety and fairness so that all might prosper together. It's terrifying for me. I've been really afraid, honestly. I wish I could say I wasn't. I wish I could say like I've been all Zen master for the last 3 years. Like it's been all cool, man. It's gonna be all things are passing. It's all good. When I'm afraid and I'm unaware of what's going on, I default to the trauma-informed coping strategies of my childhood and socially learned behavioral responses, which for me looked like this. Okay, shock and denial, blaming, sorry, Melissa, sorry, people that don't agree with me politically, numbing. I was doing a good job of buying a lot of whiskey early on in the pandemic from the liquor store on Sandy. I don't remember the name of it now. Hoarding. Okay, hoarding, thinking about how do I take care of me and mine. And withdrawing, socially withdrawing. So the result of all this was depression and anxiety. I went to a naturopath, got a counselor. I tried all the things. He gave me a prescription to eat better, exercise more, gave me all these naturopathic remedies, which are really lovely. I cut down on my alcohol and caffeine. I went to massage. I walked every day. And he gave me a hormone check. And some of you have heard this story from me. My hormones were off a little bit. Not like 10 or 20 or 30%. Like my estrogen was up 11 times higher than normal. My testosterone like 4 times. My cortisol like 9 times, which matched how I felt inside. It was kind of, there's some comfort in that to know like how I feel inside is actually measurable. And it was like, holy shit, right? So I did all the things that my naturopath told me to do. And I went back and got my blood checked 6 months later. How do you think about it? And worse in some cases, okay? And that was in March that I did that, that I got that recheck. And I think what happened is all those things I added simply just became more methods of trying to control my environment. Like they just became another way to try to control things and make things better for me. When I read today's gospel reading of Rabbi Jesus' teaching, I immediately recognized the rich man in the parable. It was me. The guy who ought to use our double city lot. My family owns a double city lot, well, bank owns it, we hang out on it, live on it. The guy who ought to be using a double city lot for an ADU, which is an auxiliary dwelling unit, in the midst of our huge human houselessness crisis. But I don't want to be troubled with the messiness of negotiating a new human community in our house and yard. So I allow my veggie patch, which was the home of Liz Schallert, who had an ADU on this part of our land, to grow fallow this year. It's just growing fallow. There's some nice tobacco flowers, a couple strawberries. I'm not really doing much with it. So my conscience is pricked by this parable today. My family's moral choices are confronted. Now, I don't want to miss the more important point of Jesus' parable today. Yes, he is challenging our thinking about the moral choices we make, but I don't want to be about moralism. That's small religion. That's small reconnecting and rebinding. I think what he's really speaking to is something much deeper. Jesus is speaking about the kingdom of God, or the kingdom of heaven, choose your language, and how we can access it so that we too may discover the profound richness of reality, not my illusions of control that come in many different forms. Our communion with this Christ-soaked world. I'm learning this truth from you, my friends, in Lebanon. 9 years ago, right up there in the sunroom, we did something very few churches in this city, let alone the state, let alone this country, are doing. The wise elders and wisdom bearers of Redeemer Lutheran had a choice. We could continue to hoard what we treasure that we had in this barn. This is a barn, okay, of resources of treasure. Or we could step radically off the cliff of fear into the abundance of Christ's. When the pandemic began, I forgot about the shared courage that I experienced alongside many of you who are sitting here right now. We cultivated that courage through storytelling about our struggles, about the vulnerability that comes with all of us struggling with our recovery work, because we're all in recovery, recovering who we really are, and connecting our stories to the stories of our neighbors. When pandemic began, I defaulted to all of the behaviors that I had learned from my childhood trauma. And when I say childhood trauma, I'm not exceptional. We've all experienced childhood trauma, okay? When I say that, I want to be clear. And from our capitalistic social values. In my fear-filled trauma response, I turned to withdrawing, controlling, and hoarding. I had forgotten who I had become with you. In this year, in the calendar year of 2022, two major changes happened for me that began to reconnect me to the reality of Christ's communion in all things. One was happening within, and one change was happening among with you. And they were mutually informing each other, okay? Within me in April, I talked about this earlier, but I got the results from my hormone test, okay? So it's April now. I came to the hard realization that no diet or exercise or naturopathic intervention was by itself gonna lift my anxiety or depression or sky-high cortisol. I kept saying to people, it's like, we're just not supposed to know this much. We know things that are going on in this world that our ancestors wouldn't have dreamed of knowing. And it's hitting us and barraging us all the time. And I just kept saying, I don't get it. Like, why would God leave us like this? How do we cope, right? How can we handle all of this apocalyptic information at once? Well, it's hard learning for me in the last 3 years, but it seems we have a superpower in us. It's our parasympathetic system within us. I tried everything else, guys. I just told you I tried everything, and it didn't work. And when I say our parasympathetic system, to me, that's the divinity that's alive within us. And it goes by many different names in many different religions. Okay, it goes by like the cosmic Christ. It goes by universal compassion, the inner teacher. You name it. All the ancient religions have a different name for it. To me, we're pointing at the same thing. Okay, so for me, I call that like the cosmic Christ, the living God in all things. The thing is that we have to cultivate it. I can't just spin on the things that I learned as a child and a young adult to cope with what's going on right now. And so I've this fledgling mindfulness practice, and I begin to see, like in my mind, oh my God, I live in a virtual reality up here. Like I tell myself shit that just isn't true. You know, about my wife, about the world, about my children, about my job, about my boss, about my mom. I mean, it's just like the list goes on and on and on. Holy shit. The more I like pay attention to what's really going on in here, woo! So feeding that change within was a change that I experienced among us. And I don't know where the chicken and the egg begins and ends, right? But I was reminded by you guys, by y'all, who I am and whom we are and whose we are. It began with Jules showing her compassion for me by asking for a one-to-one last year. Then no one's ever, like people don't ask me for one-to-ones, I guess, and that might be shocking, but they don't. Then Annalise asked me for a one-to-one this year. Then Jenny asked me for a one-to-one this year. I continue to meet with the group. There's some guys in the 11th community that I meet with occasionally, like once every month or two. Continue to meet with those guys. And on all those one-to-ones, I continue to experience the deep love we have for each other. Okay, deep love. And then recently, I've been so inspired by our lay leaders. I'm not going to name because I'm afraid I'm going to leave someone out. But they're mostly the lay leaders who have been really stepping up are female body leaders. And thanks be to God that we need your voices and your hearts and your souls to inspire me. Badasses, every one of you. Stepping into the vacuum of isolation, and you're leading us back together, reknitting us together. And last week, I was invited by Dick into his garden to just wander alongside him. It was pretty cool. It's pretty great. It was really a divine experience. And he asked me, and these are my words, how can we reinvigorate this beautiful and wounded community we began so many years ago? How do we become a place of healing and reconnection and empowerment among our neighbors? How do we live into our birthright and what we've experienced together? That was the call I felt, that I was already feeling, and to have someone else who I respect name it and to feel that resonance was really powerful for me. And I was ready for it. I don't have all the answers today, okay? I'm not trying to prescribe anything for y'all, because God knows I am just clunking along like the rest of you, right? That's what I love about us. We're just clunking along, trying to figure it out. But I can tell you, I am experiencing a spiritual rebirth within me. It's real. It's fostered by this communion. And I feel called into the messy and beautiful truth of God's reality within and among us. May we all. I have a quick epilogue. So we went up to my friends. They just bought some property up in the Sound on some island. I can't remember the name of it. It was really beautiful. We were celebrating her birthday. And one of the guys that came to that gathering, I walked by and I heard him saying something about an ADU that he just put in his backyard. And I was like, Jason, you gotta tell me about this. Like, tell me about this ADU thing. You know, because I had read the gospel passage, I knew what I was going to be preaching on today. So there's this nonprofit that will give you a loan, no money down, to put an ADU in your backyard. And all you have to do is promise not to charge the rent like above 80% of the median income for Multnomah County. Yeah, I got something to do with that veggie patch, huh? Yeah. I'm supposed to invite you to vote once. So I'm gonna give you two choices of how you wanna, I invite you to step into a one-to-one. Step in, if you're feeling a little uncomfortable about it, I invite you to find some courage within. And if you don't, that's okay too. It's all good. We're all becoming. So just one simple possibility is what's stirring in you right now. As you think about the gospel passage and you reflect on the story I just told, what's stirring? And then maybe a second option would be, what as a community, how is Jesus teaching today, his parable, how does it speak to us as a community today? Like, what are some practical steps that we should or ought or could take as a community based on where, and not out of fear, out of love. Where's love stirring in you around where we go from here as a community? Okay? Everybody got that? Okay, awesome. Thank you.